Good morning, dear students. Today we will be discussing about research question and research hypothesis. So today's discussion is about the research question. So every research starts with a research question. According to the definition, research question is a clear, specific and answerable statement that identifies the main problem or objective of a study. So the question should be clear, it should be specific and it should be answerable statement. For example, is the question is like, does the curcumin can ameliorate the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease? So it is clear question that whether the use of curcumin or curcumin as a treatment ameliorate the symptoms or disease progression of Alzheimer's disease, and it is specific and it is answerable. So that means if this is the research topic means the researcher has to conduct some in vitro cell line models or in vivo animal models or sometimes in vivo human studies using in vivo human volunteers. So by conducting this particular research, that is using Alzheimer's, using curcumin in Alzheimer's model, whether it will ameliorate the symptoms of Alzheimer's or it will prevent the progression of disease. So it can be answered by conducting some kind of research. So the research question should be clear, specific and answerable. It also outlines the key variables, population and scope of the research and serve as the basis for developing hypothesis and conducting systematic investigation. And it also guides the researcher to select the appropriate research design, methodology and data analysis techniques. For example, maybe in the above example of curcumin in Alzheimer's disease, the researcher may choose to choose a in vivo study, whether he will be using some animal models to investigate the effect of curcumin in Alzheimer's. So here he will define so what is the what type of animal he has to use and how to induce Alzheimer's in this particular animal model, and how to give the curcumin means what dose, what by which route and how long it has to be given, the treatment regimen he has to design, and after the giving the treatment regimen whether he will be evaluating the effectiveness of the curcumin by some kind of imaging technique or by sacrificing the animal and taking the brain and analyzing the key pharmacological changes involved in Alzheimer's disease. So these all are coming under the methodology and analysis part. So the research question, a clear research question will help us to select the proper research design, methodology as well as data analysis technique. Next is about the characteristics of research question. So first is it should be clear and it should be specific. So as we have seen in the definition, the research question should be clear and specific. That means it should be simple and precise and it must clearly state what the researcher intended to study without making any confusion. And the second characteristic feature is it should be researchable. That means the questions can be answered by any of the scientific methods, such as either by the experimental method or by the survey or by the observation. So by any of this scientific method, the research question can be answerable. And the third characteristic feature a research question should possess is its feasibility. That means it should be feasible in terms of available time, resource, equipment and technical expertise. So most of the time the academic research is having a time frame. The student has to complete the research within a available time frame. So the research should be feasible to complete within this particular time frame and with the resources and equipment available in the academic institution. And the fourth characteristic feature is the research question should be focused. That means it should have a good, it should be narrow enough to be addressed effectively within the scope of the study. So that means it should be focused. The research question should be relevant. That means it should be significant to the field of study and contribute effectively to the existing knowledge. So that is meant by the relevance of the research question. And the sixth point is it should be novel. That means it should address the research gap in the existing research rather than repeating the already well established findings. And also the research question should be ethical. That means it will comply with the ethical standards, ensuring no harm to the participants, environment, and to the society. And finally, it should be measurable. So the variables involved in the question should be quantifiable or measurable. So it will allow the proper analysis and interpretation of the data. For example, in the above example, if the researcher choose an animal model for investigating the effectiveness of curcumin in Alzheimer's disease, either he can go ahead with the measurement of some proteins which is predominantly precipitate in the brain of Alzheimer's disease patient, or he can choose oxidative stress in the brain as a characteristic feature of this Alzheimer's, or neuroinflammation. So what are the variables we are choosing to analyze the research effectiveness should be measurable. So these are the characteristic features of a research question. That means it should be clear and specific, it should be researchable, it should be feasible with the time, equipment, resources, and technical expert. It should be focused, it should be relevant, it should be novel and ethical, and the variables involved in the research question should be measurable. So the next is about the steps in framing the research question. So the framing a research question involve multiple steps. So first the researcher has to identify the research problem. He may start with a broad area of interest. That means maybe the researcher is interested in conducting a research in a particular topic. For example, he may be interested in conducting a research in neurodegenerative disease, or in maybe particularly some disease like Alzheimer's, or some other neurodegenerative research. So he may start with them according to his interest, or sometimes this research institution, they may be having some grants. So the researcher has to work in this particular topic whether they got the grant. Sometimes the research topic is according to the interest of the researcher. So he may identify a broader area for conducting his research. Then the next step is, in this area he will conduct some preliminary literature review. That means he will review the existing studies, journals, and articles to understand what has been already done. And this help to identifying the research gap and therefore avoiding the duplication of research. So the conducting the preliminary research literature review in this interested area is the second step. Then after that he may narrow down the topic. For example, this researcher once he go through different studies which has already been conducted in the area of treatment of neurodegenerative disease, he may find out some he may narrow down his research. That means he may find new interest in conducting a potential herbs in curing Alzheimer's disease, and he may find out that a particular herb which is supposed to have some effectiveness activity in this particular disease. So he initially he start with the herbal remedies in Alzheimer's disease or neurodegenerative diseases. Then he will narrow down, after conducting the preliminary literature, he will narrow down the topic to a particular herb in this particular research. Sometimes in this particular herb also there may not be there may be some studies with this particular selected herb, but the herb is having some other problems like unwanted ADRs or some other pharmacokinetic limitations. So the researcher may be interested in developing newer formulations which will avoid the pharmacokinetic limitations, or which will help to overcome the unwanted side effects. So he may be he will choose his topic, or he may choose his research question as a whether this particular nanomedicine or particular novel drug delivery system can effectively cure this disease compared to the pure drug. So that can be the research question. So this is the third step, that is narrow down the research topic in research into a specific topic. So after the third step, that means once the researcher narrowed down the topic, next he has to identify the population as well as the key variables. So he has to identify the target population. Sometimes the researcher maybe go ahead with an clinical trial with a human volunteer. So he has to identify this population. In the above example, he can choose patients having Alzheimer's disease. So he has to decide whether he has to go evaluate with the patients having mild stage of disease or moderate stage of disease or advanced stage of disease. So this is the target population. He has to identify the target population, and he has to identify the independent variable and dependent variable. So the independent variable is nothing but the intervention. So in the above example, it may be a single herb or a novel formulation like a nano formulation of this particular herb. So the researcher may be comparing the effectiveness of this nano formulation with the pure herb. So this intervention will be the independent variable, and dependent variables are the one which will change with the independent variable. For example, if we are giving the formulation, the intended outcome may be a reduction in the characteristic features of Alzheimer's disease. That means the reduction in the tau protein or the amyloid beta aggregation, or there may be a reduction intended reduction in the oxidative stress or neuroinflammation, or there may be an increase in the memory. So this can be analyzed by different experimental methods. So he has to identify the intervention as well as the variables which can vary with the intervention. So in this particular example of Alzheimer's disease, he can choose the reduction in two characteristic proteins in Alzheimer's disease, that is tau protein and amyloid beta protein, or the reduction in the oxidative stress, or reduction in the inflammatory biomarkers, or an increase in the memory. So this is the fourth step, where the researcher will identify the target population and the independent and dependent variable. Then the next step is formulate the research question. So here the researcher will convert the refined topic into a clear, specific and answerable question. So in this particular example, the question can be whether the use of a novel formulation of this particular drug will cure the disease better with while compared to the pure drug. So it can be the question. And next next step, he has to check the feasibility and clarity. So the researcher he should ensure that the question can be answered with the available time, resource and methods. And next, the final step is review and revise, where the researcher discuss with his guide, and he will get the feedback from the guide, and if necessary he can improve the clarity as well as research value of this research question. So these are the steps, general steps involved in framing a research question. So first is identifying the research problem. So in this, the researcher will find out a topic on which he is interested, or sometimes if the guide or the department is having some funding on a particular topic, the researcher has to choose that particular topic. So anyway, it will be a wider topic, and the researcher in the next step he has to conduct the thorough literature survey in this particular topic, where he will go through he will study different studies, journals and articles which are already published. That will help the researcher to avoid duplication in the research, as well as it will help him to find out the research gap, so that his research will fit exactly in the research gap. And the third step is after conducting the preliminary literature review, he can narrow down the broader topic into a narrow topic, and the next step, he will identify the target population, the dependent and independent variable, and then he will formulate the research question. It should be clear, specific and answerable. And next he will check the feasibility, whether he can complete the research with the available time, resource and method. So this thing he will ensure. And finally he'll have the discussion with the research guide, and if it is necessary he can modify the research question. So these are the general steps involved in framing a research question. Next is about the research hypothesis. So the research hypothesis is a clear, specific and testable statement that predict the expected outcome of a study or the relationship between variables. So it is nothing but it is an expected outcome of a research, or it may be a relationship between the variables. So you may confuse the research hypothesis with research question. So actually research question is what do you want to know, and the research hypothesis is what do you think what will happen. So the hypothesis is your expectation or your prediction about the research question. So research hypothesis will come into frame only after framing the research question. So in the above example, our research question was whether this particular formulation provide better control to the disease compared to the conventional formulation. So this was the research question in the previous slide. So for this question, there are the predicted outcome is yes, there is a better control with the novel formulation compared to the conventional formulation, or it can be the hypothesis or the prediction can be no, there is no much difference between the conventional formulation as well as the novel formulation. So this prediction, there are two options, there is a difference and there is no difference. So this prediction is the hypothesis, and the previous one was the question. And another example is the question can be whether the smoking leads to lung cancer. So this is a research question. So the hypothesis can be yes, it can lead to lung cancer, or it cannot lead to lung cancer, means there is no relationship between smoking and lung cancer. So this is the prediction. So by conducting the research in this specific area, the researcher will come to a conclusion that which prediction is correct. So the prediction is called the hypothesis, where the research question is what do you want to exactly know. So for this question, there is two predictions, that means yes or no. So that is meant by the hypothesis. So that is the difference between a research question and research hypothesis. So for your better understanding, I have included a table showing the difference between research question and hypothesis. So the research question is nothing but it's a statement or question that asks what the researcher wanted to find out, whereas the hypothesis is a testable prediction about the expected outcome. So it is a testable prediction about the expected outcome. And the purpose of research question is guide and focus and direct the study, whereas hypothesis provide a possible answer or explanation to be tested. And the stage of development is usually the development research question will develop before the hypothesis, and the hypothesis usually it will come after framing the research question. And the research question itself does not include include any direct testing. However, the hypothesis it can be statistically tested. An example is so is there any relationship between smoking and lung cancer is a research question, and the hypothesis can be yes, there is a relationship between smoking and lung cancer, or there is no relationship between smoking and lung cancer. So this is the prediction, and the prediction has to be tested with the research by the researcher. Next is about the types of hypothesis. Hypothesis can be of four types. So the first one is null hypothesis. That means it states there is no relationship or there is no difference between the variables. For example, the herbal standard sunscreen. So the researcher may be comparing the effectiveness of a herbal sunscreen with a standard sunscreen. So this null hypothesis says that there is no difference in the SPF value between the herbal and standard sunscreen. So this is called the null hypothesis. That means it says there is no relationship or there is no difference between the variables. Then next is the alternative hypothesis. It says that yes, there is a significant difference or there is a relationship between the herbal sunscreen and the standard sunscreen. So the herbal sunscreen show higher SPF compared to the standard sunscreen. So there is a difference in the SPF value when we compare the herbal sunscreen with the standard sunscreen. So this is called the alternative hypothesis. So in null hypothesis, it says there is no difference or there is no relationship between variables, but the alternative hypothesis says there is a relationship or there is a difference between this two treatment. And next is the directional hypothesis. So it specifies the direction of effect. That means whether the SPF value increase or decrease with the herbal constituent. So it shows the direction of effect. That means whether it will improve or it will decrease with the treatment. So that is called the directional hypothesis. For example, mangosteen peel, it may increase the SPF value. So if the hypothesis show the direction of effect, it can be called as directional hypothesis. Whereas in non-directional hypothesis, it doesn't state the relationship between the variables, but it does not specify. It states the relationship between the variables, but it does not show the direction. So for example, mangosteen peel extract affect SPF. It says that it will this particular extract affect SPF, but it doesn't say whether it will improve SPF or decrease SPF. So this is called the non-directional hypothesis. So hypotheses are four types. Null hypothesis that states no difference between the variables. Then alternative hypothesis that states there is a relationship between or difference between the variables. And directional hypothesis, it shows the direction of effect. And non-directional hypothesis, it doesn't show any direction, but it states a relationship between the variables. So in other example, we can say like cancer and smoking habit. So the null hypothesis, it says there is no relationship between smoking habit and development of lung cancer, whereas the alternative hypothesis says there is a relationship between this lung cancer and smoking habit. The people who are having smoking habit may have the more chance to get lung cancer. And directional hypothesis in this particular example, it says smoking increases the chances of lung cancer, whereas in non-directional hypothesis, it says smoking can affect lung cancer, development of lung cancer. Smoking can affect development of lung cancer. So these are the four type of hypothesis, that is null hypothesis, alternative hypothesis, directional hypothesis and non-directional hypothesis. The characteristic of a good hypothesis include it should be clear and precise, it should be testable or measurable, and it should be based on some theory or evidence. We cannot simply say yes or no. It should be based on theory or evidence. It should be simple and specific. It should be specific to the research question and relevant to the research question. So these are the characteristics of good hypothesis.